It was 6:47 in the morning on a Tuesday in late April when Sheriff Mason knocked on Margaret Hayes' door. She was 62. She had owned the house at 14 Oak Lane in Old Greenwich, Connecticut since 1995. Her late husband, Robert, had paid it off the year before he died of pancreatic cancer in 2014. The deed was in her name. She knew this. She had checked it last week. Sheriff Mason said, "Mrs. Hayes, I have an eviction notice for the property at 14 Oak Lane. You have 30 days to vacate." He handed her a folded paper. The paper said the bank, a bank she had never heard of, was foreclosing on a $420,000 reverse mortgage taken out in her name. Margaret had taught 4th grade at Old Greenwich Elementary for 38 years. She retired in 2018. She lived alone in the house that her husband had built additions onto, room by room, over 31 years of marriage. She had not taken out a reverse mortgage. She had never even spoken to a reverse mortgage broker. She heard footsteps on the stairs behind her. Caleb came down, 16, in pajamas, hair sticking up. Caleb was her grandson. He had lived with her for the past 2 years, since his mother had died in what the police called a single-vehicle accident on the Merritt Parkway. Caleb's father, Margaret's son, Daniel, had not visited once. Caleb saw the sheriff. He stopped halfway down the stairs. He said, "Grandma?" Margaret turned and held the paper up, her hand shaking only slightly. Henry, her Maine Coon, walked between her ankles and sat down on the threshold, looking up at the sheriff with calm, yellow eyes. The sheriff said, "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm just delivering the paperwork. The hearing is in 18 days. You'll want a lawyer." He turned and walked back to his cruiser. Margaret closed the door slowly. She stood in the foyer in her robe, holding the eviction notice. Caleb came down the rest of the stairs. He said, "Did Dad do this?" Margaret did not answer right away. She walked into the kitchen. She put the eviction notice on the table next to the breakfast dishes from the night before. Henry jumped onto the table and sat next to the paper. She did not move him. She finally said, "I think your father did, yes." Caleb said, "Are we going to lose the house?" She said, "Not yet." She picked up the phone. She called the only lawyer she trusted in this town, Eleanor Briggs, who had been in her 4th grade class in 1989 and who was now a partner at a legal aid firm in Stamford. Eleanor met Margaret at her office that afternoon. Caleb stayed in the waiting room with Henry in a soft-sided carrier on the chair beside him. Eleanor read the eviction notice. She picked up her phone and called the bank. She used the language a former public defender uses with collections departments. It took 18 minutes. The bank, Caribbean Federal Trust, headquartered in Stamford, said the reverse mortgage had been initiated on June 14, 2025, 11 months ago. The documents had been signed at the bank's Stamford branch. The notarized signature was Margaret Hayes'. The witnesses were 2 bank employees. The escort was, and Eleanor read this slowly, Daniel Hayes. Daniel was Margaret's son. He was 38 years old. He worked, last she knew, as something he called consulting. He had not been to the house in 14 months. He had not come to his sister's funeral 3 years ago. He had not come for Christmas. He had not come when his wife died. Eleanor said, "He brought someone in to impersonate you, or he convinced you to sign without reading, or he forged it outright. The signature on this document doesn't have to be real for the bank to have processed it. They have due diligence rules. They didn't follow them. She set the document down. "We have grounds." Margaret said, "Grounds for what?" Eleanor said, "Reverse the mortgage, reverse the foreclosure, recover the funds, possibly criminal charges against your son." She paused. "Mrs. Hayes, I have to ask, are you sure you want to recover criminal charges?" Margaret took a long moment. She said, "He didn't come to my daughter-in-law's funeral." "Yes, I'm sure." That night, Margaret called her sister Lillian, who lived in Norwalk. Lillian, 67, had been a paralegal before retirement. Margaret asked about Daniel. Had he come around? Lillian was quiet on the phone. She said, "He came around in February. He brought paperwork. He said it was for Mum's estate." Margaret said, "Mum's estate was settled in 2009. Dad died in 1998 and Mum in 2009. There is no estate to discuss." Lillian said, "He said it was about an old IRA she had at Vanguard. He said I needed to sign something to release the funds to me." Margaret said, "Did you sign?" Lillian said, "I signed. I didn't read. I trusted him. He's family." Margaret asked her to find the document. Lillian dug through her file cabinet and found it. The document said Lillian was authorizing a $180,000 home equity line of credit on her own house. Margaret called her other sister, Diane, in West Hartford. Diane was 65. Daniel had visited Diane in November. He had asked her to sign a small consent form for some Vanguard paperwork. Diane had signed without reading. Diane checked her mail. There were 3 credit card statements in her name. Total balance, $94,000. Margaret called the mother of one of her former students, Mrs. Reyes, 71, whose son had been in her class in 1992. Daniel had visited last August. He had told Mrs. Reyes he was working with the Connecticut State Retirement Assistance Program. Mrs. Reyes had signed a document. The document had reverse mortgaged her house. The pattern was clear. Daniel was running a long con on elderly women in his orbit. His mother, his aunts, his former neighbors, his mother's former students. Connecticut's elder financial abuse statute was clear. The amounts were federal. The pattern was racketeering. Margaret took notes on a yellow legal pad at her kitchen table. Henry slept on the corner of the pad. At 11 that night, Caleb came down. He had not been able to sleep. He sat across from Margaret at the kitchen table. He said, "Grandma, there's something I need to tell you. About Mom." Margaret put down her pen. Caleb said, "I don't think it was an accident. I think Dad did it." Caleb said, "The week before Mom died, I heard them in the kitchen. She was telling him she knew about something. She said the words mortgage and fraud and I'm going to talk to your mother. He told her to keep her mouth shut. She didn't. Then her car went off the parkway." Margaret looked at Caleb for a long moment. She said, "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Caleb said, "I'm 16. He's my dad, and I was scared he'd come back for me." Margaret reached across the table and took his hand. She said, "He won't." Henry walked between their forearms and lay down on the legal pad. The next morning, Margaret called Eleanor again. She said, "I think there's more than civil fraud here. I think there might be a homicide." Eleanor said, "Mrs. Hayes, that's not in my lane. You need to go to the state police or the FBI. Margaret said, I have a former student at the FBI. Eleanor said, Of course you do. Margaret had taught 4th grade for 38 years. Old Greenwich is a small town. By 2026, most of her former students were in their 40s and 50s. They were lawyers, journalists, judges, auditors, school principals, doctors. They remembered her. They remembered who she was. She had been kind to most of them. Over the next 18 days, between filings and depositions, Margaret had coffee, in this order, with 7 of them. She did not raise her voice. She did not appear emotional. She told the same story each time. She let each person decide whether to help. On day 4, she had coffee with Special Agent Sarah Whitmore, 4th grade class of 1991, now of the FBI's Bridgeport office, White Collar Crimes Division. Whitmore took notes. She said, Mrs. Hayes, I'd like to bring this to my supervisor today. Would that be all right? Margaret said it would. On day 7, she had coffee with Patricia Castellano, who was now the district attorney's wife. Patricia called her husband during the meeting. The district attorney called Margaret personally that evening. He said, Mrs. Hayes, this is Tom Castellano. You taught me the multiplication tables in 1988. I'd like to help. On day 11, she had coffee with Judge Eric Tang of the Connecticut Superior Court Probate Division, 4th grade, 1993. Judge Tang reviewed the documents. He said the forgery was obvious. He said, off the record, that he could not preside over the case, but he could call a colleague. On day 14, she had coffee with Anna Petrov, the editor of the Hartford Courant, 4th grade, 1990. Anna asked, When you're ready for this to be public, who do I write for? Margaret said, When my son is in custody, you write for the 73 women you don't know about yet. On day 17, Margaret had coffee with Eleanor again. Eleanor had filed the civil reversal of the foreclosure. The bank had not yet responded. Eleanor said, We'll have a hearing on the 18th. The bank will lose. The mortgage will be voided. The house is yours. Margaret said, And my son? Eleanor said, That part is not up to me anymore. Day 30, the 26th of May. Daniel arrived at 14 Oak Lane at 10:14 in the morning. He drove a leased BMW. He had not been to the house in over a year. He let himself in with a key Margaret didn't know he still had. He carried a folder. He was smiling slightly. He said, Mom, let me help you get organized. Margaret was in the kitchen. Caleb was at school. Henry was on the windowsill in the morning sun. Margaret said, Daniel, sit down. She did not move from the counter. She had a cup of coffee and a folder of her own. Daniel sat. He opened his folder. 3 black SUVs pulled up in front of the house. 8 federal agents got out. 2 stayed by the front door. 6 came inside. Special Agent Whitmore led them. She said, Daniel Hayes, you are under arrest for elder financial abuse, wire fraud, mortgage fraud, and conspiracy. The state of Connecticut has additional charges related to the death of Sarah Hayes. Daniel said, Mom, what did you do? Margaret looked at him. She said, I had coffee with my old students. She said it without raising her voice. The agents took Daniel out of the house in handcuffs. He did not look back. Henry walked across the kitchen floor and rubbed against Margaret's ankle. The next morning, The Hartford Courant ran the story. It named Daniel Hayes. It named 6 other women. It named the bank. The bank stock fell 11% by Wednesday's close. Caribbean Federal Trust would settle 6 lawsuits over the following year and lose its license to operate in Connecticut by 2027. The reverse mortgage on 14 Oak Lane was voided in court on June 8th. Margaret kept the house. Caleb stayed. Daniel was held without bail and would face federal sentencing. The state of Connecticut continued investigating his role in his wife's death. Margaret never raised her voice. She did not chase her son through the courts. She did not weep on a stand. She just had coffee with 7 former students over 18 days in a small Connecticut town. Justice in this story did not come loud. It came quiet, in coffee shops, served cold, by a woman who had taught a town's children how to do their multiplication tables. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. We tell stories like this every night.